Hello, everyone. Oh my God. Thank you so much for coming to this panel. This is kind of incredible. This is True Weird Stories from Video Game History. We have 4 video game historians. So we're going to go through some bizarre stories from game history. Hopefully it's entertaining. Everyone's probably delirious right now. This is going to be great. I'm going to go down the line. We're just going to introduce ourselves before we get started. My name is Phil Salvador. I run a blog called The Obscuratory. I'm a librarian. I'm an archivist. And I write about unusual, old, forgotten games.
Yeah!
Hey!
I'm Rachel Simone Weil. I'm an 8-bit homebrew developer and a collector of girls' software, electronic toys, and video games.
I have 2 microphones. Oh, yeah.
There you go.
I'm Kelsey Lewin. I work sometimes with Frank with the Video Game History Foundation. I run a retro game store in Seattle called Pink Gorilla Games. Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I also do deep research on video games and talk about it on YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube. I'm Frank Spaldi. I run a nonprofit called the Video Game History Foundation. We preserve the history of video games. And I also do a little moonlighting in game dev for a company called Digital Eclipse. We do kind of like collections of older games that I work way too hard on. Yeah!
So before we get started, I want to talk about this like nefarious-looking Mario up here. So this is a really cool story. This comes to us from a video game historian in the Netherlands named Wietse van Bruggen, who was doing research about Nintendo's presence in the Netherlands, and he came across this really weird event that happened on September 15th, 1994. A bunch of bootleg Game Boy games were seized by customs in the Netherlands. But instead of just destroying them, Nintendo had this like public display of force where they brought them out to a runway. And they dumped him out. They had this guy in a Mario suit stomp on him, and then he got the steamroller and ran him over. These pictures, it's a war crime. Like, it's really hard.
Is Mario a cop?
It's really unsettling. But this is an example of the kind of amazing thing you can find when you're doing video game history research, and you're going through archives, and you're looking at old newspapers, and you're going through you're interviewing people. So, in the spirit of this, we want to share 4 bizarre things we have found through our research and studies and so forth. Kelsey is going first. Sorry, Kelsey, but you were up first.
We're shuffling around here so I can look at my own slides. And I didn't realize I would have notes here, so I wish I would have kept them on the slideshow, but that is okay. I'm going to be talking about a little thing called the Gluco Boy. Yeah. So, the Gluco Boy was not something that was on my radar. It is, of course, as you can imagine, it has to do with blood glucose monitoring, but we will get to that. What was on my radar was this little thing called the Bayer Digit blood glucose monitor for the Nintendo DS. Very big mouthful of words. You could find these at CVS. As you can see, Nick Jonas, I think that's Nick Jonas, one of the Jonas brothers, was even promoting it, because he has diabetes too. So this was actually mainstream-ish, I guess. If you could buy it in stores. It wasn't the most crazy thing to find ever. But when I was researching this, I quickly found that it actually started on the Game Boy Advance with a little thing called the Gluco Boy. So despite being developed by an American, everything done in America, this was actually only released in Australia. And so far, not a single one has surfaced, ever. There's never been one on the secondhand market. The only ones I know of in existence, there's one in a glass case at Bayer, and there is one in the inventor's house. And that's it. So this was a thing that was really difficult to do research on. There really wasn't that much info out there. I go to a lot of places. I'll use, databases at colleges. I will use the Internet Archive, of course, and print media and all of that stuff. And I found some things, but there was still a lot of holes in the story. So it is a blood glucose monitor that doubles as a Game Boy Advance cartridge. There are 5 built-in games to it, 2 long main games that really could be standalone games, and then 3 little mini games. And the whole point of this thing, as you can probably imagine, is because little kids don't want to test their blood glucose. You have to stab yourself, basically. That's not fun. No one wants to do that. So this was to increase compliance in blood glucose testing by rewarding them with video games and cool in-game perks, right? And the other thing that it had was a little bit of an online community. You could register your device and talk to other people who were using it. And it was inspired by the creator. His name is Paul Wessel, that older guy there. He had a son with diabetes, and he basically was like, his son was always hiding his blood glucose monitor because he didn't want to stab himself. It makes sense if you're a kid, right? Or an adult. No one wants to stab themselves. But he always knew where his Game Boy was. So he was like, well, what if I combine those things? Then he can't hide anymore. But I still had so many questions. I mean, the fact that there were none out there, like what were the games on there? I had some brief descriptions to go off of, but there was no artwork. I didn't know how this thing came about. How did he get in front of Nintendo? That sort of thing. So I did what any good journalist does, and I stalked him and found him on LinkedIn. And he was surprisingly very excited to talk to me. He was a guy who worked for several years on trying to get this device on the market. He wanted to bring a device that would be useful for him, and he thought it would be useful for other people. And obviously, since this is the first time most of you guys are hearing about it, it's tough to work on something for so long and then no one knows it exists, right? So he was pretty excited to talk about it. I wanted to know, what were the games, what was the story. So let's talk about what he told me. So he founded this company, Guidance Interactive, in 2000. It was a healthcare company, and he had a couple of different ideas. It wasn't just this Gluco Boy. This was part of his patent right here, as you can see. He was imagining it for what was popular at the time, which was like the Game Boy or Game Boy Color. But he also had other ideas that he made a very broad patent here. So it would possibly work with like a cell phone or some other, small electronic devices, because he was smart. He knew that you can't just walk up to Nintendo's door and knock on it and be like, make this product, right? So it wasn't easy for him to get in front of Nintendo. So I was like, okay, so how did this happen? Well, it's a very long, weird story, but it starts with a recreational softball team that he was on with members of Head Games Studio, publishing studio. They made like the Cabela games and that sort of thing back in the day. Through this softball team, recreational softball team, one of his teammates knew a guy by the name of Bruce Lowry, who was with Nintendo for just a couple of years, but like all the way back to the early 80s, pre-Nintendo explosion, basically. And so then that guy took him to Don James, who's still at Nintendo, and then he had to take him all the way up to Nintendo of Japan. So anyways, if it wasn't for this recreational softball team he was on, he would not have made it all the way to Nintendo. And it kind of required that all of these people cared that this guy was so passionate about making a diabetes device. But there were still a lot of, once you get in front of Nintendo, there's still a lot of issues here. So diabetes is really uncommon in Japan. People don't have it. Kids especially do not have it. And having any kind of medical device is a really big liability risk. What if it gives someone incorrect data? They could die, they could get sick, right? And Nintendo doesn't want anything like that. So they said no, just flat out. No, come back when you've got FDA approval, come back. None of that. They just said no. But he just continued to bother them. He went through the FDA approval process. He did all of these, studies and kind of group. He tried to legitimize it as much as possible. And eventually, I think he told me he thinks it was just because they were so sick of hearing from him. They eventually caved, and they're like, fine, make your device, whatever, make your Gluco Boy. Oh, and I did forget to mention, he had trademarked the name Gluco Boy, which is actually a significant thing here. This is kind of a bargaining chip, because Nintendo was kind of trademarking all of the things ending in the boy suffix. And they just didn't get this one. So you don't want someone to be able to go use something that sounds like it's for a Game Boy on something else, right? No, that was a little bit of a bargaining chip for him there. But, so they agreed to it, but he, he'd been working on this for so long, he was broke. And he was so broke, he said he mortgaged his house several times, he had his power shut off, and all this time he was kind of pitching this to investors, he was really trying to get people to, fund this thing. He won some awards even, some entrepreneurship awards, but no one really wanted to make this thing because think about it, it's a pretty narrow audience, right? I mean, you're not just talking about the diabetes audience, you're talking about the kids with diabetes audience who like video games, who would buy a device like this. You're shrinking it pretty far. And finally, the one place that agreed to give him some money was an Australian investment firm. So we took it to Australia because that was the only place that would make it. So I had a great conversation with him, learned a whole lot about how it came to be, but we still didn't have anything about the games. So this brings us to Sensory Sweep Studios, which is no longer around. This was the first piece of art I found this wasn't online anywhere, I got this from the lead designer. This is the first piece of Gluco Boy artwork that I found. And look at the styles clashing there. It's very weird looking. And Andy Swanson was a guy that Paul Wessel, the inventor here, actually poached from Nintendo. He made the e-reader, among some other things at Nintendo, and was sort of the guy who was like, okay, well, this won't sell unless you actually have some games that aren't terrible on it, right? Like, no one's gonna wanna play dumb edutainment games on this. They don't wanna learn about diabetes. This isn't Packy and Marlon. They wanna actually play a good game. Otherwise, what's the point? But I was still stuck here. There was no trace of this game online. There was no artwork until I started stalking someone again. And it took me to this guy, Brad Butler. He was the lead designer on the Gluco Boy games, and if he looks extremely young to you, that's because he is. He was like 20 when he was the lead designer on Gluco Boy. So yeah, that's just the kind of studio Sensory Sweep was. And Brad kept everything. And this is why it's really important to stalk people, I guess. And pester them about what they've got and if they still have stuff, because without him, it would have been a kind of interesting story, but instead of just being a kind of interesting story, we have the games now. We have at least a close to final build and several not final builds of the game. Sensory Sweep Studios was hired because Paul Wessel had made a deal with them several years before, and they were on a really big time crunch, and it all accumulated in this 20-year-old guy working on a bunch of games that are for an arguably important cause, I would think, right? That's a lot of pressure, I think. And through talking to him for several hours, I started to learn a lot more about kind of the developmental hell that went through with Gluco Boy and how much pressure they were under and how they had to cut so many things and how there were a lot of things that on the final product the people at Guidance Interactive didn't even really like that much. They didn't really like the RPG that's on this, that's on here, which is called Lost Star Saga. So let me talk a little bit about the games. Is this my video?
I think you can play it from there, yeah.
Okay. How am I gonna move this around?
There we go.
Oh no, there's no presenter mode. There's no bar.
Okay. Here. Let's see what we can do real quick. So I want to show you guys some.
Nope.
Okay. I want to show you guys some footage from these games, but in the meantime, I'll just talk about what they are, because it's pretty interesting, mostly because they're actually not terrible. The first game on there is called Knock 'em Downs.
I don't know why it's not. PowerPoint, the worst.
Can I over here?
Oh,
there we go. Okay. All right. I don't want any volume. Let's see. Sorry, this is gonna be weird because I'm trying to do it from over here. Sorry, I really wanted to have a playable version here, but I didn't want to have to put emulators on someone else's computer. So here we are. So this is Lost Star Saga. This is, this is just the overworld and showing the different games right here. You start out in this little room that's your bedroom. This is Lost Star Saga. It's a like science fiction type RPG. It's really not terrible. Like the sprite work's not bad. Look at that, like, right? No, yeah. Kind of interesting. The dialogue could use some work, but in general, you know, for something that was really only like 7 or 8 months of work, like look, that could be in a real this is a real game. That could be in any RPG you guys might actually play and not on a blood glucose device. This is Knock 'em Downs. This is an action RPG, and I really have a lot of fun with this game. Your weapons, you get a bunch of different weapons that you can, you know, if you test your blood glucose enough, you'll be able to upgrade your weapons. But it'll shoot things like teddy bears, or you know, there's a sticky hand. Yeah, here we go. Here's a bunch of different weapons you can get. And then there's mini games as well. So these 3 games, Solar Wing, which is just kind of a very normal side-scrolling shooter. This one, Plexus, is like kind of like Breakout, I guess. But this one's cool, Raccoon Rancher. And you have to get the raccoons into the correct, like, you have to get the red ones on one side, the blue ones on one side, and the other side like that. But these were like pretty interesting games that were not terrible. And when I was talking to Brad, who worked on these games, he was really like, you know, we should re-release these at some point, right? Sorry, this is not interesting. I'm just trying to get some more gameplay. I don't want to see my face. Who cares about my face? Stuff.
Link to talking. There we go.
There we go. Here. Okay, that's Paul Wessel's current company. There we go. There's more cool stuff. I just went through like all of the attacks on here because they all look awesome. Look at that. It's awesome. So, anyways, this is a game that, you know, had the one guy. Oh, I should talk about this too. Sorry. Had the one guy not wanted to like save all of his stuff, this would have been completely gone. And if we had waited too long, I mean, it probably would be completely, because this isn't the type of game that like most people, you know, when you've got a game company that makes a lot of kind of shovelware games, I don't consider this shovelware at all, but they did make a lot of shovelware games. You know, people tend to think that stuff is not quite as important, right? I mean, it's not sexy, it's not it's not Mario. But so beyond just getting gameplay and the builds and all of that stuff, I also got as a design document, as a development document, or pitch document, I'm sorry, from what they originally pitched to be one of the games on there. It's called Vasco, and it's a like upgradable robot thing. This isn't what they ended up using, and it was because they hated the name Vasco, because like diabetes can be linked to the vascular system. That was the explanation I got. But yeah, so here's some more gameplay. It's really cool. Oh man, I went like way over my 15 minutes. I'm sorry, I'll wrap this up now. Anyways, that's Gluco Boy, and it's awesome. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, now you gotta figure that all out.
Good luck,
sorry.
Phil.
Alright, I'll figure this out at some point.
Wow. Wow.
I think this might just be going back to the beginning of the slideshow. Nope, no, it's just not. No, I'm just going to reopen PowerPoint. That's my desktop. Thank you for your patience with technical difficulties.
The good news is we're the last panel in here, so.
Alright, there we go. Let me jump to the slide. Alright, so I'm going to talk about what I consider to be the worst bug in any video game ever. It's really bad. And just a warning, there is some offensive language in this one. If there are children here,
at midnight?
Apologize, I guess.
Yeah, and go to bed. Yeah.
So I want to give some context for why this bug happened and what's going on with it, and kind of the environment it happened in. The 80s and 90s were a boom era for educational games. There were a lot of computers at schools, there were a lot of computers at homes, and increasingly they could do more advanced things. They could do multimedia, CD-ROMs, color graphics, and it was a lucrative market for educational games because people, wanted some reason to justify their home computer if they had a child. So a lot of companies wanted to get in on it. A lot of companies wanted to start publishing and selling their own games. One of those companies was the electronics manufacturer Panasonic. Panasonic had a game division called Panasonic Interactive Media, which, if you know them from anything, you may know them for their involvement in the 3DO console. They were one of the major manufacturers. They published a lot of the games for it. They were also heavily involved in the follow-up system called the Panasonic M2. That was not released. That never really transpired. So they had published some other games. That was kind of their big thing they did, though. But after all that passed, in 1998, they started a brand called Panakids that would publish educational games. Like this one here called Little Caesar's Fractions Pizza. In which, as you can imagine, you learn fractions through the power of hot and ready Little Caesar's Pizza. A lot of stuff like that. But one of the first ones they put out in 1998 was a game called Secret Writer Society. And it had a bug in it. This ended up being one of their last games. It had a bug in it that was so bad and did so much harm to the company's reputation that the company closed a year later, and this was cited as one of the reasons that led to them closing. So this is really cool though, because so this bug is well documented in the press. There's a lot of coverage about it, but we haven't seen it in 20 years since it came out because Panasonic recalled and presumably destroyed every copy of this game. But I got one. So now I get to share this with a bunch of drunk adults. This is great. So I want to talk a little bit about what the game is to kind of explain what happened with this. So Secret Writer Society is a writing game, and it's not like the creative side of writing. It's not creative. It's not teaching you how to come up with a story. It's the rote mechanics. It's teaching you punctuation, how to structure a paragraph, capitalizing words. It's really uninspiring, and I think if it wasn't for this bug, we really would not be talking about this game now. It's really just kind of a small footnote. It has some neat things, like it's got kind of a secret agent theme, and this little anthropomorphic piece of paper is guiding you around and showing you how to do things, but it's really not that great. There are some free writing sections. There is a diary where you can type in, if you have a crush on someone at school, you can put it in your diary, you get a page every day. And you'll notice at the bottom of the screen there's a button that says read. This is the problem. On the Macintosh version of the game, when you click it, it starts reading what you wrote. If you wrote a nice long paragraph and you click the button again, this is what happens.
Hey, I had a good day. We learned a lot of actions. O-R-F-U-C-K-E-R, motherfucker, son of a...
It keeps going. In case you didn't catch that, I'll do one more.
Today, I had a good day. We learned a lot of actions. O-S-U-C-K, cocksucking,
You may have some questions. Okay, 15 minutes, we gotta go. So this is real. This is what happens in the game. This is actually what happens. So you may be wondering, well, why is this happening? This really should not be happening in an educational game. Thanks to some very entrepreneurial people on the internet, we have a better idea of what's going on. It seems to be related to how the program is managing memory. We don't know the exact mechanisms, but basically, when you click the read button, it's loading into memory in the same place it is loading the text you wrote and the swear filter. So what happens is when you click the read button, it starts reading it. You click the read button a second time, it's loading everything into memory, it doesn't know to stop. It thinks it's still reading your paragraph. As long as it's still loading the next paragraph, it just keeps on reading right into the swear filter. So this is really bad. This is, for an educational game, this is the worst thing that could happen. And for Panasonic, the fallout was immediate. The Wall Street Journal, okay, first of all, this game, so this game came out in like February, March. No one caught this until June, is the first thing. But, so it came out, the fallout was immediate. The Wall Street Journal ran a story, and here's the quote they got from the Panasonic representative, who said, "It's a bad thing if some child is sitting at the computer and all of a sudden it starts swearing at you. Miss Gibbs concedes." So they had to put out apologies. They recalled it, put in a replacement copy. But eventually, when the next year came around, Panasonic Interactive Media closed that March, and this was not the only reason. So like, it's not like, you know, the myth about the crash of '83 and ET or whatever. It's like there were other factors. They had worked on this game console that was never released. So like, there were obviously other things that were causing their sagging finances, as they said. But this trade journal specifically called out Secret Writer Society as a game that damaged the reputation, because like, you know, if you were publishing an education, if you wanted to make an educational game, you wouldn't go to these people first. Like, this would not be your first choice. So that's Secret Writer Society. But the story does not end there. There's another really weird twist in the story. There's a group called Artmark. They are an art counterculture protest group that targets pieces of mass-produced media. If you know them from anything, you might know them from the SimCopter Easter egg. The SimCity spin-off SimCopter, normally there's parts of the game where scantily clad women appear, but one of the programmers who eventually founded Artmark hacked it so on his birthday, I think, scantily clad men would appear instead, and he was promptly fired from Maxis. But they did things like that. They claimed credit for someone who bought talking G.I. Joe and Barbie dolls and swapped the voice boxes and sent them back to the stores. Like, they did that kind of thing. So Secret Writer Society happens, passes through. October comes along. Artmark comes forward and says it's not a bug, it is in fact an act of deliberate corporate sabotage. They claim there's a programmer hired by Panasonic who purposely sabotaged the game as a statement about what happens when you let a parent raise a child, an educated child, with an untrusted computer program. So this is a bold claim. And Panasonic immediately came out and said, this is nonsense, this is false. They named the specific producer who programmed the swear filter and just threw him under the bus. They were like, just to make a point that like, no, this was actually a bug. And Artmark was like, you just can't handle the truth, they don't want you to know their company is so flimsy. They made that up. Like, they made the whole story up. But this was the official story until just recently, actually. I got in contact with the co-founder of Artmark, and he said, like, it was such an absurd story they had to embellish it and add detail to it, which is kind of amazing. What's amazing is that, like, because it was a bug, it kind of makes their point for them, that this was like a computer program that was not very well tested, apparently, that some parents that may have exposed their children to things they didn't really want them to see necessarily. And I think those kind of concerns have a lot of potence today, thinking about things like algorithms and AI. Thinking like when you're on YouTube and you let autoplay go and you accidentally get to a bad video, then you start getting like white supremacist recommendations in YouTube, things like that. Like, there are systems we don't totally understand how they work, and we don't have control over them. They can sometimes control what we interact with and what we see. This YouTube stuff, obviously, this is like way more serious. Secret Writer Society is like a way earlier example at a much smaller scale that is way funnier than this. Like, I'm sure there were some parents who were really upset, but in retrospect, like, this is hilarious. This is so good. And that is, I think, again, the worst bug in any game.
Hi, so my story is not going to be funny, it's just going to be heartwarming. Aww. Also, I was like, a midnight history panel, there'll be like 15 people. So I don't have that many slides, I apologize, but I'll make up for it with lots of fancy talking. I don't know if I mentioned this in my intro, but I run this thing called Famicom Museum, where I sort of preserve the history of girls' software and electronic toys. Part of the reason for that is that I found when I was collecting video games that there wasn't that much known about girls' games. A lot of collecting is done by the community, and people kind of collect what they own and collect what they like. And I found that a lot of girls' software and video games, just there wasn't a lot of information on the web about the backstories of these games. So I was kind of interested in uncovering those. So today I want to talk about this game, which is Barbie Fashion Designer. Okay, I want you guys to take note of something. Some portion of the room went, huh? And some portion of the room went, whoa! And I found something really interesting. A lot of people played this game. Raise your hand if you played this game. Look around the room. That's a lot of people, okay? And there's probably a couple of you that didn't raise your hand and were really surprised about this. So I'm going to talk about Barbie Fashion Designer. I made this game a little bit of my like holy grail. And when I was in grad school studying the history of girls' games. And one of the reasons is I had heard that this was a really important game and it was really popular when it came out, but I didn't know anything about it. And in fact, when I was in grad school in 2014, this game didn't have a Wikipedia article, which I was surprised about, especially because it was one of the top 10 best-selling software titles in 1997. And it didn't even have a Wikipedia article. I couldn't find out who worked on it. And I was really shocked. And so I kind of made it my mission to spread the word about this game until it got a Wikipedia article. So let's back up and talk about why this game is important. So there's something called the girls' game movement of the 1990s. And really what it's about is in the 90s, in the US in particular, people started getting computers with CD-ROM drives. And so game developers who didn't want to take a risk on girl games for consoles were like, oh, you know, CD-ROMs are inexpensive to produce, and families that, you know, maybe girls don't have consoles, but maybe the family has a computer. And so there was this big boom and interest in developing software for girls for CD-ROM. And Barbie Fashion Designer really kicked off this movement. This was the first really super successful game that made other software developers kind of go, oh, hey, like there's a whole other half of the population that maybe we should be looking at. So the kind of like the overarching story of the girls' game movement is it starts in the 90s and it sort of ends in the 90s as well. There's a big surge in interest in that girls' game movement in CD-ROM development, and I'm going to tell you sort of the fate of it because it's related to Barbie Fashion Designer as well. So let me talk about what this game is for those who don't know. It is a software title in which you have a three-dimensional Barbie that you can pick outfits for. But not only can you pick her outfits and design them, pick the colors and things like that, you actually print these outfits on your home printer. And they use a special kind of fabric. And so it feels like real fabric. And you kind of cut them out, you can color them. This game actually came boxed, as you can see, with markers and a tube of Barbie branded puff paint, which is pretty cool. And you would essentially fold these clothing together like origami and create outfits that you could put on your actual dolls. And so that's pretty cool. I was able to track down the producer of this game named Jessica Durchin and just interviewed her and published this interview recently. So I want to share some of the really interesting things that she told me about the development of this game. So Jessica was fresh out of film school. The first thing she worked on was a movie called Nightmare Before Christmas. Yeah, that was cool. And she was like, oh, it's really cool, this like intersection of like film and technology, and she was kind of interested in learning more about that. And she got this job at Mattel. She was in her early 20s. Her dad had faxed a resume recommending someone else, and his daughter's resume was stuck in the fax machine, and that's how she got her job at Mattel.
That's awesome.
Which is like a cool thing that doesn't happen anymore. And so she was, you know, quite young, quite inexperienced, and she was asked to work on this project, Barbie Fashion Designer. The idea actually came from a toy designer's daughter who they had a computer at home, and she said, you know, Daddy, I want to design clothes on the computer and print them out. And they sort of pitched this idea internally at Mattel, and eventually after a while they convinced the company to go for it, to try it. It was a very experimental team, just like 10 or 11 people working there to work on this product. They had a couple of challenges. Modeling Barbie in 3D was difficult. So the development was in '95 and the game came out in '96. So getting her to walk the runway with these fashions, so designing clothes and then wrapping them on a 3D model proved to be quite difficult. They also had difficulties, so they were partnered with a company called Digital Domain, which was founded by this guy, James Cameron. And they had two projects. They had Barbie Fashion Designer and Titanic. And they were both of these projects were late. So Digital Domain was like a video effects sort of company. And so they were working on their two main projects. And Jessica tells this great story about how the Titanic team would go get into the Barbie servers late at night to render shots for the film, and she would call them and say like, "Get your stupid boat movie off my Barbie servers." That was really great. Hearing her talk about Titanic was fabulous because, of course, it hadn't come out yet, and none of us had any idea what that movie was going to be like. But she would say, "No one's going to see that movie. Everyone knows how it ends." It's really great. So that was another issue that they had in the production of Barbie Fashion Designer. Another issue they had was loading times. And again, this is like the early '90s. Not everyone's running the same computer operating system. People had highly customized machines, so you had to sort of design for everyone. She said that originally the loading time for getting to see Barbie wearing the outfit you designed was 20 minutes. And that was a lot of time for a child to wait. And she was like, "Yeah, we had these little animated shoes, but like it was just 20 minutes." And so they actually hired some hackers to come in, and like for every minute they could cut off of that time, they would pay them more money. So one other challenge, I guess they had a couple other challenges. Retailers were very not super into this idea of having a Barbie software. They thought, girls don't go into the software aisle, no one's gonna find this, we don't want to put it in the toy aisle. And so they had a hard time sort of convincing retailers to carry a game like this. And then of course there was nothing out there on the market like it, so it was a little hard. One of my other favorite stories about the development of this game is that they had to figure out how to make printable fabric. And this had never been really done before. And so Jessica was saying she would always have printers at her desk and like a toxic haze above her desk because she was always trying to fit fabric in them and it would catch on fire and stuff. And working late, she went home one night and she had a dream. And she had a dream that her bed was on fire. And she realized in her dream that pajamas have a flame retardant fabric. And she went the next day, she brought her pillow in, and she cuts her pillow into an 8.5 by 11 sheet and puts a pillowcase fabric through the printer, and sure enough, it works. And that's how Barbie Fashion Designer fabric was born. More minutes, so I'm gonna keep talking. Thanks for the applause, though. As it turns out, this game went to market and it did not sell very well. She said it sold about 11 copies its first week, and it seemed like it was pretty doomed. And so the president of Mattel at the time said, "Let's TV advertise this," and that was a really big deal because in 1995. CD-ROMs for children were not advertised on television, and she believes it was one of the first CD-ROMs to ever be advertised for children. And after it was television advertised, you could see the girls were taking the dresses out and putting them on the dolls. It sold amazingly. It kind of skyrocketed Mattel, actually. Mattel made so much money off of this game that they offered to buy Hasbro. On the success of Barbie Fashion Designer, we will buy Hasbro if you're interested. So they were like very flush due to this game. And it was so successful, actually, they did a million spin-offs. They had Barbie Nail Designer, Barbie Jewelry Designer, a ton of things, and they weren't quite as good. I think what made this one really successful is that they really understood the way that girls already play with dolls. So they were fitting into girls' sort of existing play patterns, and they really like hit a home run with this game. Obviously, again, being I think one of the top 5 selling games of '97. So what happened to Mattel in the end? Mattel Media, who published this game, they ended up buying up a lot of the competition. So there were other smaller girls games companies, and they sort of got moved into Mattel Interactive, and then Mattel Interactive was dissolved, and all the competition was dissolved with it. And that was pretty much the end of the girls game movement of the 90s. Sad, but we're gonna end this on a happy note. So since I've been making it my life's work for people to know about this game, I've showed it in a bunch of exhibits, and I went on Adam Conover's podcast, and I said, there's no Wikipedia article for Barbie fashion designer. And several days later, someone told me that the Wikipedia article had been written. So,
Yay!
And if you want to listen to the full interview with Jessica, check out femicom.org for that and a bunch of other interviews from girls' game history.
Great, thank you.
Oh, sure. Oh, I do want to skip it. Can I skip it without giving it away? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, you guys know this one? You know the story already.
It's a Netflix show, right?
Yeah, this is based on the Netflix original movie. Okay. We're going to go through a brief history of Carmen Sandiego, one of the world's greatest criminals. This was her first outing where in the world is Carmen Sandiego. In the sequel, she kind of started specializing, right? So she went to America in game number 2. Game number 3, back to Europe. Game number 4, we're going to skip for a second, but by game number 5, she had mastered time travel. But just before that, she had one more localized mission. Yes, this is real. This was the 4th Carmen Sandiego game. I discovered this on the bowels of the internet like 4 years ago, just like in a list. It was just listed, and I was like, what the fuck? Why in the world is Carmen Sandiego in North Dakota? Much like Barbie fashion designer, no Wikipedia article, no nothing about this game. Wasn't a disk image online, you couldn't download it. That box art didn't exist on the internet yet, but we'll get to that. It was just like known to exist, and actually there was a disk image online, but it was just disk 1, which meant you could look at the title screen and put in your name and then be told to put in disk 2, but that's all you could do. So where did this game come from? In the middle here, this is Mrs. Berryman, Bonnie Berryman. She is a teacher in Minot, North Dakota. She still is, actually. This photo is circa 88 or so. On the bottom of the screen is her son, whose name escapes me, unfortunately. But so she was a 4th grade teacher. Her son would come to her class sort of like after his classes to play games on her computer. She had a computer in the class, an Apple II. And he was really into the Carmen Sandiego games because they were pretty cool. And he turns to his mom one day and he's like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if there was a Carmen Sandiego game about North Dakota? And she's like, yeah, that would be cool. Now, here's the thing about that idea, and I think why she might have taken this seriously, was that she taught the state as part of her curriculum. They did that in, I think, 4th and 6th grades or something like that. They taught the state in North Dakota, and there's like no books about North Dakota. Like they didn't have material, and you know, having computers in the classroom is a very new thing in '88. People are very excited about it. So she's like, no, this is actually be a really good way to teach the state. So she goes to this guy, Craig Nansen. Craig, for the entire county of Minot, basically was like the computer guy for schools. And she goes to Craig and she's like, hey, they should make a Carmen about North Dakota. Can you like ask them to make us? And you know, the way he describes it to me, he's like, yeah, right, okay, sure. I'll get right on that. But he's like, I don't know, I'll ask. And so he wrote them a letter, which we have. Which is basically, I mean, you probably can't really see the words, but it really is just like, hi, Broderbund, world's largest computer game manufacturer. It would be really nice if you made a Carmen Sandiego game about North Dakota. We have some money, we can give you $80,000. We'll write the questions, and you make the game. The $80,000 thing, it's a long backstory, but there was sort of a statewide initiative to make educational content for computers, and they sort of earmarked some money off of that for this pitch. So, meanwhile at Broderbund, these two guys are sort of credited as the creative leads of Carmen Sandiego, sort of the inventors. That is Lauren Elliott on the left. On the right is Gene Portwood. And actually, look at this picture. That's Gene Portwood drawing graphics for Carmen Sandiego on the Apple II. That's amazing that this picture exists. I mean, he's pretending to draw graphics. But, and within Broderbund, this room was lovingly referred to as the rubber room. This is sort of like where people got very creative, probably while smoking things, and sort of like designed games and animated. Actually, Gene Portwood came from Disney. He worked on he was like an animator on like Lady and the Tramp and stuff like that. So they get this letter in from Craig, right? And Broderbund's kind of at this weird point right now because they did these Carmen Sandiego games. They had only done 2 at this point. Europe was sort of like just starting. And they suddenly had this big hit, and they don't really know what they're doing yet with Carmen Sandiego because they could go a lot of different ways. It's like, should we go the educational route? Because it was actually meant to be a consumer product. It wasn't. It was a game. It wasn't meant to be like edutainment. Should we, do other game genres? Should we go corporate? Like they had a pitch floating around for like a Star Wars official Carmen Sandiego game, like Where on Tatooine or something. And so they get this letter in and they're like, okay, this is really smart. Like I think we've got Carmen Sandiego down now. I think we can pump these out kind of quick. And so they go to Doug Carlston here on the left. This is the Carlston siblings, the founders of Broderbund. They go to Doug and they're like, hey, we got this letter and I know it sounds kind of crazy, but think about it. Like if we can pump this thing out and it makes money and like it makes us money with North Dakota, like we can do 49 more of these. This can be, and I talked to Doug about it, and from Doug's perspective, and I'm a game developer myself, this is true. He's like, I've heard this a million times. Like, we have an engine now. All we have to do is plug in content. He's like, I knew that wasn't going to work, but sometimes you just got to let them try. Was the way he described it. So he's like, okay, and shortly thereafter they have a contract with Broderbund. So the contract, I don't have the contract in here, but we do have it in the Video Game History Foundation's archives. And the contract was basically what they proposed. We'll pay you $80,000. We'll write all the questions and stuff, all the clues, because only we know North Dakota. And you guys just do all the art and programming and stuff. And as part of it, we'll purchase 2,000 just like loose discs that we'll use throughout the schools. So production begins, and there's an impromptu game dev team in Minot, North Dakota, made up of public educators. This is the North Dakota Database Committee. And these were all teachers who, like on nights, weekends, and a little bit on the summer, were making an official Carmen Sandiego game. And I mean, we have pictures of this, which is great. We have pictures of North Dakota teachers with vintage Diet Coke. And actually what they have spread out in front of them, I know what this stuff is. So they're like, okay, North Dakota, we have no resources at all. There's just we're not that interesting here. So they actually like wrote letters to all of the mayors in North Dakota, and they're like, can you send us stuff about your town of like 200 and tell us something interesting? And they worked for a really long time and collated all this stuff together. And again, like there's no books on North Dakota, there's nothing like that. And all the Carmen Sandiego games like came packaged with like a manga, like an almanac or something, right? Like a reference book that you would use to play the game. They didn't have that, so they made their own with Print Shop. Actually, with the copies of Print Shop that they asked Broderbund for. They had to make one. And so they worked on this a long time and went way over time and budget. Like it was, they thought it would be 8 months. It was like 2 years it took them to do this. But it eventually came out, and there it is. There's Where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego. Like I said, they purchased 2,000 discs that were, embedded in schools throughout the state. There is a box, right? They didn't get boxes. You can see a box here, though. In theory, they sold this game as a box product. We have the press release where it says, consumers can order it straight from us for $35. This is the only piece of paper I've ever seen that says you can buy this game. I went through like every Broderbund catalog. They never mention North Dakota, because why would they, right? Why are they gonna like dedicate screen space to that? I actually, when I called Doug Carlston, like, okay, let me give you some perspective. Doug Carlston, he was very careful. Every time they made a game, they manufactured a game, he pulled one and he kept it. Like he kept an archive, he sent it to the Strong Museum of Play. You can go visit it. There's no copy of Where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego at the Strong Museum of Play. When I called him about it, he's like, we made that? Like he remembered the project, but he didn't remember that they made like a retail game. So this was, all this stuff was lost for a long time. They did, by the way, advertise the other Carmen games within North Dakota, but they didn't advertise North Dakota anywhere else. So again, this game's lost, packaging is lost, maybe doesn't even exist. So I went to North Dakota. That's me taking a selfie with my president at a place that deep fries steaks. Deep fried steak is awesome. And I went and met up with, most of the surviving members of the North Dakota committee. And we got the story, we got all this paperwork and stuff, and we recovered the packaging because Broderbund had sent the teachers on the committee like a complimentary copy, like each one of them. So they got like 13, 2 of those survived. When I asked Doug, because he didn't know there was a box, but he knew that they had sold some, I asked him how many, and he thinks it was like 12. So we have what is definitely the rarest Carmen Sandiego game ever made, finally recovered, and we have it. And Acme Detectives, get your pocket computers out, because we're going to try to catch Carmen Sandiego right now. We had sound. Where did it go? It's a really terrible BB sound. That's okay. Is there like a volume or something?
I think just the. We'll see what's the shredder. Okay.
I just want to make a quick comment that we didn't plan this, but the Gluco Boy was inspired by a child with diabetes. Barbie fashion designer was inspired by a child who wanted to dress up for Barbie. Where in North Dakota's Carmen Sandiego was inspired by a child who wanted to play Carmen Sandiego in North Dakota. And somewhere there was a child who wished for something more.
That's okay, don't worry. worry about it. There's no sound, but that's okay. Just imagine there's really horrible screeching happening all the time. I wanted to play this game a little bit because I want to illustrate how difficult this is, even with the internet, because this is where in North Dakota, circa 1988, is Carmen Sandiego. All right, we're ready to go. Let's remember brown eyes because we're going to need that. And let's track our criminal. We're not going to catch Carmen, as if you remember the rules of the game, we track our henchman down before we get to her, and it takes like 60 of these before we get to Carmen, and we don't have that long. I guess we do. There's not a panel till like 9 a.m. By Friday at 11 a.m., so we have a week.
GDQ's like right down the street in like 2 days. Like.
Oh, we could, yeah. We could learn to speed run. Okay. We're here in Tioga, North Dakota. Really quick, let's get to our notebook. I believe we had brown eyes. Was that correct?
Yes.
All right, let's get that going. Okay. Tioga derives its name from an Indian word meaning peaceful valley. So now you know that. All right. Who you guys want to talk to? Librarian, right?
Yeah. Come on, Phil.
Oh, we have another clue. They enjoy fresh buffalo meat. Good to know. The imposter wanted to write a report about the rodeo records of the Champions Ride. So, Acme Detectives, where in North Dakota is the Champions Ride? Also, what is that? Is anyone actually looking?
I'm looking.
Yeah.
Okay. So they enjoy fresh buffalo meat. Let's see. Is that North Dakotan food? Is that German food? Is that Indian food? Is that Norse? What? Who likes eating buffalo of these four? Should we go Nodak here? Yeah. Nodak? Okay. All right, North Dakota Champions Ride. Do we have anything? Champions Ride match, Facebook.
Yeah.
I think so. It's a rodeo.
Wait, we have someone who has.
So here,
I checked out the current side of it is Beach, North Dakota.
Beach, North Dakota. There it is. Let's go. All right, state westernmost city. Remember that. It's going to come up on the test later. Golden Valley, located near our western neighbor, Montana. Okay. All right, who are we talking to? Let's talk to the rancher. Oh, we're on the right track. We're on the right track. We're getting you, vile henchman. Okay. Come on. Culver wanted to research North Dakota's earliest settlement. Where's North Dakota's earliest settlement? It's even kind of like if you're playing Where in the World, you can kind of fudge it, even though it's circa 1987 or whatever, because most of those facts don't change. Some country names change. Where is it?
Pembina. That's what I got too.
Okay, all right. There, Pembina?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, North Dakota expert.
I've been there. It's pronounced Pembina.
There's a lot of hours.
Fargo. Okay, all right. Pembina, Rough Rider Award winner General Harold K. Johnson, a native of nearby Bozeman, became Chief of Staff of the U.S. Armed Forces in 1964. So now you know that too. All right. Are we on the right track? Excellently done, Kevin. Thank you. Oh, it's the first schoolhouse of something, maybe at the stage. I'm not sure. Okay, we need more clues about what they look like. They wanted to write a paper about the State Industrial School. So you guys look up the State Industrial School. I'm going to see if we can get some clues about. No. Railroad Museum off I-94. Got it. All right. Ask for directions to the Grant Marsh Bridge. Okay.
Mandan.
Mandan?
Did we pronounce that wrong too?
No, you pronounced Mandan correct. Good job.
Q&A.
Yeah, so we do want to also try to do a Q&A. Are we going to try to simul Q&A this, or are we going to try to? Are we maybe giving up on this? What do you got? I want to catch a damn criminal.
Well, we can let Frank play.
Oh. They are here. They are here in Mandan, but we don't know very much about them. Oh, you know what? We have screwed ourselves, because now that we're here, we can't get any more clues about them. So, let's visit the crime lab. All right, enter our notes. They have brown eyes and they like, yeah. So, no warrant issues. We failed, everybody. Oh, wait, suspect. These are suspects. Can we guess one? Can we guess? I don't think we can. No. We failed, everybody, so thanks for coming out.
Still not working. Theoretically, we should have our info up there. I don't know why this is.
Well, can you hang on? What if we end the slideshow and start?
But let's try doing a Q&A now, though, as we are done with the play portion of this evening.
What if we did that? There we go.
In the back of the scarf, yes.
The Gluco Boy. What year were they developing that?
That
I'm
was.
curious because of the graphics. It looks like borderline Super Nintendo.
Well, it was on the Game Boy Advance.
I'm thinking like 97, 98.
No, it was past 2000. I think it was 2004 was when it came out.
That's when it came out. And when did he start like actually developing?
2004.
As a quick.
Well, it was less than it might have been end of 2003, but it was less than a year turnaround.
Blue in the back, you, yes.
Is the Gluco Boy ROM available on the internet anywhere?
It is preserved. I am still working out, there are, legal barriers to this that because the guy who released it to me still has a job. It's preserved and we're working on that. It won't go away and it will be on the internet eventually. We're just kind of tiptoeing around that at the moment.
All right, you, yes.
There's been a Pound Puppies game that I have been searching for the longest time. It was like one of those point-and-click stories where you click everything on the screen, sort of like one of those like putt-putt games. Do you have any information on any putt-putt games or Pound Puppies games?
Consider me officially on the case. I don't. It's actually, like I said, because it's quite hard to get information online, and so many of these games sort of fell through the cracks. But the most important thing for me in doing my research is talking to other people that remember these games, so thank you for asking, and I'm on the case.
First you question the farmer.
The secretary.
With the glasses, yeah, yes.
So I guess for each of you, I was wondering what is kind of your holy grail at this point, or something you're trying to find?
I have a great answer for this.
Refinery, an oil simulator made by Maxis after SimCity. There are no known surviving copies. I talked to people who are in touch with folks at Chevron. I've spoken to the family of the creator. It is gone. We have documented it. We are aware of how it worked and how it was developed, but there are no remaining copies. It would be cool, but it's gone at this point.
We're on the case.
So, you got one?
I do.
It's for each of us, right?
Yeah.
Mine would be, it's a tie between, so Casio Lupi had 11 titles released. I have each of them in box, making it a complete set. But there was one game that was in development that was an RPG where you play as a teddy bear. And I would like to get whatever state that was in. Another one is do you know the Epoch cassette vision console? There was a pink version of it. Came in a giant pink suitcase, and it was called the ladies version. I have seen one on eBay once. It was $1,000, and I've never seen it since then. And I have an alert that I've had on eBay for 7 years. I've only ever seen it come out to auction once, so yeah, those are my grails.
So I also have two, one that did come out and one that didn't, just like you. The first one that did come out, it's called Mama Mite for the Wonderswan. It is a pregnancy tracker for the Wonderswan. So it comes with a scale. It's a baby blue Wonderswan that comes with a scale and a cartridge that helps, you like stand on the scale and you talk about, you input, how you're feeling that week, and it tracks your pregnancy for you. I've seen one on the market as well. It was in god-awful condition and it went for about $1,500. So it was like yellowed and looked like it lived in a room full of smoke for years. It was very bad. Probably wasn't very good for the baby either, but. Wait, I have another.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm taking it away from you. You're done.
It's also for the Wonderswan. And it's a GPS for the Wonderswan.
Wow.
And that was, as far as I know, like done. Like they showed it off at a trade show, but they didn't ever do anything with it. So.
This isn't my holy grail, but just riffing off that, my friend and neighbor Brandon Sheffield collects Gizmondo games, and he has all of them except for the GPS. So, video game GPS.
Yeah.
My holy grail is, okay, I think the Mother series is very important to a lot of us. I think it's a very culturally significant work, the trilogy of games. I think, I think that's really obvious. I think the fan communities that it spawned is proof positive of that. And my holy grail is that the work that was done on the original Mother 3 is somehow accessible to people to look at and see like what that would have been. And you guys know that whole story, right? Yeah. So the N64 version of Mother 3. Yeah, and I mean it wasn't done. It was never gonna be done. But like if there's a really long interview, you guys should track down if you haven't, between Satoru Iwata, Shigeru Miyamoto, and Itoi, the developer, the mastermind behind the Mother series. And it was right after the Mother 3 cancellation. It's just this huge roundtable, sort of like a prototype Iwata asks, like years before the fact, going over why they had to stop working on it and where it was. And where it was is like a really fleshed out game. They were developing it chronologically, and some of the chapters were just like, let's just like stub in a cutscene of what happens in that section. So like it's not just like early work that was tossed. There's like a lot of substantial stuff that's there, and I have heard that the people who worked on the GBA game like had that game as reference, so it is kicking around. And they even like mentioned, like Miyamoto even mentions in the interview that they were about to do Space World, and Miyamoto wanted, even though they just canceled it, he wanted to put it out at Space World as like, here it is, like look at it before we put it away forever. So if it's in that state, I think it's good enough for people to be able to look at even in like a closed environment. And that's my holy grail.
Yes!
Frank, can you speak more to how you even came across Carmen, North Dakota?
Can I speak to how I came across Carmen, North Dakota, like the existence of it?
Yeah.
It was like, I think just on Wikipedia, it was like in the Carmen Sandiego entry, it was just like mentioned.
It was just like part of the bullet list?
Yeah, exactly. It was like part of the bullet list. It was just there. The reason that I went to North Dakota is kind of funny though. It's that a documentary series that like Red Bull was doing, like they were doing something on game preservation and they wanted to come to my house. Meanwhile, I had been trying to talk to the North Dakota people and like was having a hard time. So I was like, yeah, you come to my house, but let me pitch you on this other thing. Why don't you fly me to North Dakota and let me talk to these teachers? And like, they totally did it and made a really bad documentary, but but we got the game out of it, and I tricked people into paying for that to happen. So.
You.
Is there any connection between Gluco Boy games and the Captain Domino game?
No, absolutely no. I mean, they're both games that involve diabetes in some way, shape, or form, but not the same company, people, nothing. Yeah.
In the back.
You guys are all awesome, and I just want to say to Frank, you're doing God's work. I read the article on the SimCity on NES.
Thank you.
That's incredible. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Is there anything else like from there that you want to expound upon? Like, it was a fascinating article.
Is there anything from SimCity on the NES that I want to expand on? I think I dumped everything I had. Did you read that damn article? What else am I going to talk about? You can just come talk to me afterward, though, if you got questions.
Adina.
I bet you thought someone in the audience wouldn't notice a certain picture on your slides, Phil. Would you mind backing up to your first slide?
Which one?
The one with Mario on it?
Your first slide where you had a picture of when you started your section.
Oh, the educational games, right.
The educational games section. Yeah. What is that logical journey? Because it suspiciously looks like Zoombinis.
It is Zoombinis. It was the logical journey of the Zoombinis was the name of it when it came out. I think it's been re-released just as Zoombinis to various platforms. When it first came out, it was Active Mind Series and Logical Journeys. Before like Zoombinis were like a thing. Like that was just like a long-winded title for it originally.
I want a picture. I've never seen that image ever, and I just went through all of Google. Didn't find a single thing like that.
I may have gotten it on Moby Games. They recently took the watermarks off all of their cover art and they have it in high resolution and it's fantastic and Moby Games is wonderful.
That's also where all of mine came from. It's a really tremendous resource and we are blessed to have them.
Thank you.
There's a word.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. I missed you. Mario. Thanks.
Yeah, because I guess mine's a two-parter now. One, what the hell is a Wonderswan? What would you say was more controversial? The swear filter in Secret Revenue Society or the hot coffee glitch?
To answer that one, hot coffee, because it had like giant ripple effects through the industry in terms of content. This was just like this hilarious, stupid thing that happened. Like this was just like a one-off. Like wow, someone blew this one really bad. But like hot coffee did have ripple effects of the ESRB, so that definitely had more controversy. This one, I think, like no one really cared about it, so it kind of slipped under the radar. Which.
Yeah, and the Wonderswan is a handheld that was a joint venture between Koto Laboratories and Bandai, meant to compete with like Game Boy Color / Game Boy Advance-ish. The studio Koto was founded by Gunpei Yokoi, who has been with Nintendo for a super long time, back when they were a playing card manufacturer. He was the guy in charge of the Game & Watch project, the Virtual Boy, the Game Boy, did a bunch of that stuff. So he left Nintendo and founded that, and then they made a like competitive handheld. It was only released in Japan, so if you haven't heard of it, that's, yeah. And it's a weird name too, so.
Can I plug real quick before people empty out anymore? I'm doing a panel tomorrow, I think at 5, called The Strange Death of the Nintendo Entertainment System, which is its own very weird video game history story, so go to that too.
You, sir.
I was just kind of curious if any of you have ever heard of a Game Boy cartridge that's used to program a Singer sewing machine.
I have two.
Yeah.
That's a lie, I just sold one actually. I had two up until like a month ago, but yeah, that's kind of a weird story, I guess. So the short version is that, first of all, it started in Japan with this other sewing company, and eventually was brought here. They had, they had 3 different models of it. And it came in a lot of pretty colors and stuff too, but essentially the whole thing is, back in the early 90s, it was very expensive, and well, mid to late 90s, anything before, 2000s really. It was really expensive to put a computer on another piece of equipment. Like an entire computer to deal with something is expensive, so why not use something that already exists, like a Game Boy Color? And so that was sort of like the brains of a sewing machine, and they could cut the price of it into like a quarter by letting the Game Boy do the computing work to figure out embroidery and different stitching and that sort of thing. So,
do you have the knitting? No.
No, because that one doesn't exist. Although you had a friend who made one, right?
Made what? Oh, the knitting machine for the Nintendo. Brian, Bunny Boy, made one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like the same sort of functionally. I just wanted to say really quick about the Singer sewing machine that, like, I remember, like, when it came out, I was paying attention. I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. And it said, just go to your local Singer dealer to get a demo. I was like, I'm doing that?
Yeah.
And
they did summer camps.
I went to every Singer dealer in Las Vegas, and none of them knew what the hell I was talking about. So that's my story.
I'm sorry.
So real quick, we're 15 minutes over, so like one more question from you. You had your hand up. Oh.
The other person over there.
Oh.
Got it answered.
Who's the other person who had their hand up?
I had a question about the Miracle piano game. Is there anything about the development that I won't let you? Because it was like kind of cool as a kid, but also now looking back, it was kind of a weird thing. It's like a Nintendo game. Like they do a piano that you could learn how to play piano from your Nintendo.
Question was about the Miracle piano system. You were basically asking how did that come about.
Yeah.
I don't really know the whole story behind it, but I kind of feel like, you know, it was probably very similar to, you know, what you were talking about with the sewing machine, which is like, oh, we have a computer that's in like however many millions of homes, but how else do we interact with it, right? Like what, and can we save costs and teach people things? But no, I can't recall seeing any history articles or anything about that system.
I don't think any of us have researched.
No, yeah.
None of us have researched it, but yeah, that you see that same kind of like, this is already a computer. We're going to use this as the brain of the thing. Very often, there's like the Nintendo Challenge 2 racer-made CompuTrainer thing, and basically instead of having a computer try to figure out when you're working out with your bike, you have your NES do it and calculate all that for you, because not everyone had a computer. So.
Yeah, and there were other things like that that never even happened. Like the sewing machine that you mentioned was actually a knitting. There was a first-party Nintendo peripheral that they showed in '87 at a trade show that disappeared, but it was a knitting attachment for the NES that you could sort of like follow the guide on the screen, and you know, same thing where it's like, you know, you have a computer already, so let's take advantage of it. There was incredible technologies. Guys do like Golden Tee and stuff like that. They had a dartboard for the NES. And it was like, we have an electronic tracker for where the darts go. It's this computer that's in your house. And I don't know, it's kind of unfortunate. I don't think anyone has really researched the Miracle piano, because it's like not weird or funny, like the Power Glove or the U-Force or whatever, you know. So it's like it's almost like too normal for people to make a YouTube video about, I think.
All right, we should probably like formally stop this, but we want to keep talking with everybody. Thank you so much for coming out.